My sweet Lord. And so Cato, as I've been saying, is making a change in this time period where it is in transit, is now moving into its home place in the lunar mansions, or the nakshatras, we might call them in the Vedic philosophy. Naga means night and shatra means shelter. So it's where we go to see what's happening at night time. It's the only time we can really read the stars. And one of the events, and this is something I'm going to talk to you about, is kind of the events that I've seen, just what was significant to me, or in kind of history, very short history of a similar event that happens every 18 years when the Cato energy, which represents, like Leonard Cohen would say, the crack and everything. And is that the Irish crack of CRAIC, or is it a crack in a dish? But he says it's through the crack and everything that the light gets in. I think it's both, actually, because laughter can break a very serious mold, just like breaking something, physical that you might have really liked or whatever. But sometimes we have to get to the stage of laughing at the whole situation, whether it's a relationship or whether it's something you really liked or whatever. But ultimately we have to let all this material world go, and to get a laugh out of it eventually. So some of the things that have happened over time are not so funny when they're happening, but then when we get time to look at it, we realise we're so much better off without what it was that we thought was so totally compelling that we would have gone to any lengths to have it. Let it be a drink or a drug or a dress or a relationship or whatever it was, a house or a car. And when we got it, we thought it was great, and the next thing, we didn't have it anymore. And so that's life. All things must pass, as George Harrison would have said as well in the song My Sweet Lord. He's actually, he's looking for that. He has that sense of longing that would have been there at that time in the 70s. In a hippie, what I would consider a hippie era, was one of the things I always aspired to be in, was a hippie. I even went to California years later looking for them, but they were long gone, and what was left wasn't nice. The few that never went home. But I'm glad I did to get a home out of it. I had a very short, not successful, where I saw the crack in things, and I wasn't laughing at the time, but I'm very glad at this stage that it didn't last too long, and I did manage to come home out of it. California had the flowers in their hair and all that kind of stuff, and I had this vision of what it would be to be able to, even very young, doing the Peace Brother and the Afghan coat and all that went with it, But anyway, that's part of my past and my history, and that's long gone. And still it's not, because I still have that aspiration to the My Sweet Lord. And one of the interesting things in My Sweet Lord, the song, is that at the background is constantly being recited the Hari Ramakrishna mantra. And this mantra is something that protects the mind, but the Hari Ramakrishna, Hari represents the Jupiter, which gives us wisdom. Rama gives us the knowledge which clears our fears and our ignorance, to make us see the light of a situation, is the role for Rama. And Krishna is the one who brings the compassion to those that are still suffering, and the willingness to have that quality. So that mantra has been recited, and you've probably familiar with it, or maybe those of you that are younger never even heard it, but it was very common in my day, and obviously I'm much older than a lot of people that might be listening to this right now. But I want to go back to, I'm going to start this in 1914, and one of the things that happened in Ireland, particularly in the 1914, 13, 14 time period, is the lockout, the extreme poverty that the elites at the time inflicted on the working people when Larkin and Connolly tried to get rights for people's rights working, and the workers walked out, and the elites could afford to let them walk out. But there was a man called George W. Russell, if any of you have ever heard of him. He went to great lengths at the time to speak on behalf. He was a great speaker and a very learned, spiritually aware Irish citizen. He was aware of many different dimensions, and one of the things he was very interested in was, and studied for a long time, the Bhagavad Gita, and was one of the main people at that time that was involved with what they call the revival of, or giving status to writers and to he had a newspaper that published Joyce and Paddy Kavanagh, and he was sometimes friendly with Yeats and George Moore and all these people at that time. He has his initials in the tree on Gort in Galway. He was very influential in terms of, he was given the task of setting up banks for the farming, and they set up co-ops where the farmers could support each other rather than relying on what he called the Gombean men, who were selling their products to the farmer at full price and buying their products at low price, buying from the farmers. So the farmers set up the co-ops, and George W. Russell did the rounds of the country. And not alone did he help the men and the farms to produce, but he also set up the ICA in Ireland, the Women's Irish Country Women's Association. He was very much involved in that, and set up the knitting, the products that women could produce. And so that was very successful, actually, until what happened in I'm not going to go into a full history of Ireland or anything, but around that time there was great opportunity there was monies being spent to establish a standard of living. One of the things that he complained about in the villages in Ireland is that there was no art gallery, there was no books, there was no beauty, everything was done around the pubs. I was reared in one myself, so I kind of know what he was talking about. The people who were elected from the pubs, the representative, are not just from the pubs, but the business people. They were the people who selected the people who were going to go forward. And obviously they would be in a position to choose, because they'd know who was who or whatever in the area. So he used to call them the Gombean men, but he never liked the pubs himself. As I said, he was a very spiritual man and well worth reading his books. Anyway, I won't go any further into George W. Russell, but that's a whole story in itself. But he was very prominent at that particular time in the 1914s, and what happened, with the 1916 rising followed from what happened with the lockout, because people were left completely destitute. Families, women and children made their way to England and sat in doorways begging for food. And some people gave it to them, some didn't. But it was a terrible, terrible time and a terrible cruelty to inflict once again on Irish people trying to survive and make a living. What happened after that? James Connolly was part of that, and he got George Russell to create a flag for them, which is the plough and the stars. And that actually, plough and stars, is actually, again, within the Vedic tradition, the different Maharishis, the great seers, are symbols on what is the plough and the stars in the Vedic tradition. So it's interesting, the carryover and the interest that was there in Ireland at the time in Eastern philosophy, as well as our own basic culture which had been mocked, or there was a revival. We know Pádraig Pearse and these people who died fighting for what they believed to be the beauty of what is our culture and our language and our philosophy in life, and so that was very much, I suppose, where I came from. That was very much bred into me as well, because a man in the village, Martin Joyce, who was our school teacher, was very proud of our Irish heritage and gave us a great sense of how important it is to honour where we come from and who we are as people. And there might have been a lot of put down coming from other quarters, but I was glad to have known somebody in education who didn't. And there was many I met before him and since that had little respect for what was meant to be education. But anyway, that's a different story too. So 1914 and 1913 was the lockout. 1914 was trying to raise funds. The women as well, the Cumann na mBan, went to great lengths. Women got together, again, people who would have had resources and went to America. Terence McSweeney, his story, his sister. It's just powerful people at that time went to great lengths to support what was a desperate situation. And so, one of the things then in 1933, years later, John B. Keane talked about that you'd be afraid to hear your heartbeat. It was so what was happening in Ireland at the time. You had De Valera, McQuaid, very much in control. Fianna Fáil operated from 32 to 48. Cavan won the All-Ireland. Well done, Cavan. I don't know if they've ever done it since, but anyway, they won the All-Ireland in 1933. But it was the time of depression, it was the time of World War II. So it was a very challenging time in Ireland. And so then 52, when we go on another bit, and what have I got to say here? Sean T. O'Kelly became the president. The foot and mouth disease was a possible challenge to society. There was a lot of care taken in terms of farming, and nobody could come in and out of the country without having their boots washed, and where did they come from and what animals, and they couldn't bring animals into the country, and we managed very well to protect our world and our world from, I remember it so well, the way everybody went behind it to protect the animals that we have in the country and for people coming and going, unlike what happened with this current thing that happened for us. But there was a great support to make sure that everything was safe and there was nobody coming from wherever with God knows what. It was totally locked down to everybody had to have the proper clearance, and to protect the farms and protect the animals and protect our society. It was the most important thing really at the time because of the risk factor of what it would do. The other thing that happened at the time as well is there was about 3 million people living in Ireland at the time, and the film The Quiet Man was released at that time as well. And I suppose, there was a certain amount of stability. So the other thing that I looked at, the time of the president and Sean T. O'Kelly, there was only one candidate and he was the only candidate. And so we go on from 52 to 1970, 71, and that's the Woodstock era. And Joni Mitchell brought out a song, I Am a Child of God. We Are Stardust. I want to get my soul free. Let's get back to the garden. Life is for learning. And so I suppose I still feel very moved by all that time, the whole thing of bell bottoms and embroidering the trousers and putting a big daisy flower in my mother's car. It was in Anglia. I was only 16, but I that was the world I wanted to be part of, even though we used to get the New Musical Express, and we used to, we kind of knew what was going on, but really had no access to it in Aughrim in the west of Ireland, but I wanted to be there. So, yeah, and the album from George Harrison, My Sweet Lord, happened at that time as well, and or the song that was on it, My Sweet Lord, All Things Will Pass, or All Things Was Past. Anyway, I'm not so good at my particulars, but I just want to show you the events, very significant events, that it was a time of change, and we're in a time of change now as well, and we've survived. We have survived. I'll go on another bit too. That was 1969, 70, 71, because this period of time that we're in right now, there's just starting of Cato going to its home place in the Nakshatra of Maga. Maga is the power holders, the people who are in power, that are experiencing a crack, or the crack, or whatever way you want to put it, whether it's the drug, the broken, or the fun, or however you want to read the word crack. I just imagine that some aspect of it is in the mix here of all these events that I've sort of captured in the telling of the story. So, as I said, the 1970s was very much about, human rights, the civil rights movement, Woodstock, My Sweet Lord. All that time was hugely powerfully impacted my life, shaped what I was looking towards and what I wanted to experience. And I can tell you, of all the three, I'm lucky to be here at all for the amount of interest I had in a territory that probably was breaking all the rules, and in a way has created the society we have today, because I suppose those of us at that time, I was born in 54, and those of us at that time, we didn't want to be wearing the mantella in our hair and going down to the church and listening to something we didn't believe in, and knew there was something seriously wrong, but couldn't know exactly why or who brought the blue van that brought the sheets, that brought back clean sheets. And we didn't know. We were just so innocent. We didn't know that there was, I don't know, at one stage in Ireland there was over 70 industrial schools, not to mention psychiatrics, and so many people locked away for, other than they were a nuisance or they were free labour, or, the Magdalens and the abuse of the women. And I often wonder what happened to the coming among those powerful women with their uniforms and the way they went around the world raising awareness about the troubles that were happening in Ireland, and managed to be effective, even though their pictures were wiped out of the photographs that were left of the 1916. And I do believe that they were probably, shaved and raped and put into these institutions and just used as slave labour. The most powerful would have been subjected to go back to the kitchen and do what you're told, or else. And so I just think that there's a big gap there between how are these women who were so powerful and so organised, and as I said, the ICA, that were able to produce and be very effective in community, and how this was all pushed behind the scenes, and how society could lock up women for just looking good, or for being too cheeky, or whatever, or men who are too many men in a family, and put them into an institution, psychiatric, and fill them full of tablets and keep them there for the rest of their lives. It's a fierce, and again, it wasn't just Ireland it was done. It was the policy, and everywhere there was seems like a hierarchy, that the elites changed from being, I suppose, an aristocracy to being a religiosity, and that was even stricter and colder and bolder than what was gone before it. This need to put people into categories and into their place and create slave labour. So anyway, come on to we're at 1989. In 1989 we got the internet, the World Wide Web, and the Iron Curtain came down, and there was, again, it was another, World Wide Web. I worked in digital, so I was sort of aware of the ability of the computers to be able to connect with different places, different people, and we had access to what were punch cards and modems that you could connect with one computer to another a few miles away, and there was that type of activity going on. It was very basic, and obviously it grew tremendously in the meantime to where we are today. But back then it was a novelty, and it was a privilege to be involved in the growing up of that whole industry, even though I'm not so good at it all the time. But I was certainly impressed with it, for what it could do, and still am. I just don't know enough about it because it has continued to change, and without education or a backup of support like we had in the computer company, you couldn't keep up with it, but there was a few geniuses behind the scenes all the time that if there was a problem, you just needed to give them a call. Now everybody's got their own computer at home, and there's no one to give a call to, no one to educate. And as I say, I'm in my 70s now, and it's very hard to keep up with I'm still trying, but on this social media, but I do need help with it. But yeah, it is, in terms of knowledge, it's tremendous, and when people get over the fascination with all the stuff that might be a source of entertainment and gratification, there's so much knowledge out there. There's no reason for anybody. I'm an astrologer, and there's so much information online now about astrology. You can go in and ask AI to calculate your chart and tell you what would be good for you for the next week if you want. I didn't do it myself now, but I'm encouraging people to do it because the information is there, the knowledge is there. Why not use it? And it might not be 100%, but it'll give you some sense of the power of the knowledge. And I would recommend particularly even Vedic astrology, even though it might seem that bit more complex, and it is, because it's way more layers of information in it. The 27 angels that Leonard Cohen sings about, in one of his songs, the 27 lunar mansions are the nakshatras, are a source of guidance because they're ruled by the moon, and the moon affects our minds, whereas the zodiac signs are ruled by the sun, and they come from a soul level within us. So, but it's our mind all the time that distracts us, and so that's why then the shelter for the mind is so important. And that's why this movement of Ketu to Ketu's nakshatra, and Ketu has 3 nakshatras. Every planet has 3 nakshatras of their own that they call home. And this one in particular that Ketu is moving to right now is one of those 3 that he owns. And so when there is a change, it does affect all of us. It affects our society. It does bring about the changes. And so coming on to 2007 and 2009, we had the housing crisis and we had Bitcoin. And if anybody was fortunate enough to buy a few Bitcoin that time, they're definitely in the billionaire bracket probably by now. But it was interesting, very hard to get information about it again. There was lots of rogues selling all sorts of stories about this is the one, this is the one, this is the coin, this is the one that's going to make it. And there's plenty of rogues out there to sell it to you. So if any of you are thinking of buying into the cryptocurrency and what it means, you definitely need to look for somebody who knows something about it, because I can warn you, I've been there, done that, and met the rogues. So I would again, and I'm a bit adventurous that way anyway, I think any of these time periods that I've lived through and moved through, I've always wanted to know, well, what's this about or what's that about, or I just want to know, and still do. So the Berlin Wall came down at that time as well. And so, yeah, the other interesting thing as well, you know, the housing crisis in Ireland and the bank's failure and the debts and the lies that were told at that time by the banks and the government. And interestingly, Iceland let the banks fail and they did fine out of it. And our government decided that the Irish people should pay off the debts of the banks. And it's a strange thing to see, a government that we would elect, ordinary people of Ireland. We're not a monarchy or we don't really have a huge elite class as such. You know, most of us just come from farming background or, thereabouts. And the people are selected from within the community, you would think. And you would think that those people would protect the assets that are Irish and protect the people and protect the jobs and make sure there was a home for the people and but instead of that our assets have been sold off. The beetroot was we stopped producing it because it was sugar and whatever, and the next thing it's been supplied by somebody else from abroad, and now they're talking about Brazilian beef and and they're talking about vegetables coming from Nairobi, and when there's perfectly good vegetables being grown locally and genetically modified. Why would we need it? We have the best of land and we have plenty of rain to make anything grow, and so why would we elect people who would consider selling it out? Why would we spend the money on our visitors before we'd spend it on our locals, like, when we know that there's trouble? But as one young man that I heard speak at a talk about homelessness, and again, the wisdom of it, and he could see through it, that homelessness and this sense of keeping people impoverished actually keeps people in work. It's a bit like the psychiatric hospitals that were created. They were created because they housed people, because they provided work in an area. And it's like work dependent on people failing or creating sickness so people can have employment is there's a terrible sadness in it. It's just a terrible sadness in it that would be when the human potential is so vast and so creative. And that's the nature of life. It is just so creative. It keeps on creating. And there's more food. And I always think of it as a woman, and the feminine and the divine feminine that is the earth. And that no matter how many people the earth produce, there's enough food to feed them, because that's the way the feminine body works. When she's feeding a child, the more the child wants, the more she'll produce. And when the child doesn't want any more, then the mother can rest. But even if another child turns up, the mother can still feed the next child, because there's a requirement for food, because that's the way Mother Nature works. And so that's just the truth of it. It's life, it's nature, to provide for all the people that are on the planet. And the only problem is that people are stored in. There's a few, and I can't understand why people need to earn trillions and billions, even though most of it is based on interest. That's the way they calculate things. It's not the money itself that's involved, but the interest rates that keep being charged and keep being added to it, and then they go into trillions and zillions, and sure, it doesn't matter anymore. But what can you use all that money for? Like, they're talking about living on Mars or living on the moon or whatever. Why would a few people choose to spend all that money for them to live on another planet? They're only going to survive for a certain length of time anyway. And all the people they leave starving, hungry. It just doesn't make sense. And why would they be wanting to kill off so many people? That doesn't make sense either, because it's bad business sense even. If you get I saw there today, somebody put up a thing about all the cars that are around them were without a driver. So who are the people that are going to be buying those cars if they're out of work and there's so few people? Who's going to be buying them? Who's going to be using them? I can't see how it can make an economic sense. There's no point in setting up a factory to produce ice cream if nobody wants ice cream. Who's going to want the cars? Who's going to spend the money on the products that they're hoping to produce for the few? Who's going to, unless they do robots, but the robots are not going to reproduce, or if they do, it's going to be some kind of mechanical thing that won't have the soul, won't have the spirit, won't have the natural nature in it. So it seems so nonsensical to spend so much resources on what seems ridiculous, that it can't sustain itself, because there won't be enough people to sustain it. There won't be enough. Give everybody a salary, okay, give everybody this universal income to what? To buy enough food while you stay in your little hut for, you won't be travelling, you won't be 15-minute cities. So we'll all circle around like little mice and only go back and forth to feed ourselves. Why? Where's the creativity? Where's the joy? Where's the diversity? Where's the fun in all of that? Like, we've come through a very interesting time, I would feel, in the last 100 years. It's just been so much change, and I'm sure the potential for the next 100 years is also huge. But the only reason the potential was there up to this is because there was people with the capacity to bring that new energy. It wasn't for the one person to own 50,000 acres of land in Ireland. I believe Micheál Martin has 50,000 acres of land. Or seemingly Bill Gates owns half America in land. Why? Why not share it out and see the genius that can come through with the diversity, with all the souls that have come with purpose, divine purpose, to make this world a beautiful place. And so I'll finish at that now. It's Kate who tonight as well. One of the other things, it's the last night of the Divine Feminine Devotion, the 9 nights of the Divine feminine and devotion to the divine feminine. And I was saying, to do your Shade of Ahawira, but it's also a celebration of the Rama, and great, I suppose he'd be mainly responsible for, as I said, in the Hari Ramakrishna mantra, he's the Rama, he brings the light of knowledge, and his place of birth is Ayodhya. Ayodhya, I think that's how you pronounce it. But I was there with a good friend of mine, John Cook, in India a few years ago. We went on a pilgrimage out there, and we were taken on the tour of Ayodhya, and it's a story in itself to tell of the experience of it, but it was extraordinary, to be in that place and to know the extraordinary, how would I put it, the spiritual awareness and the everything, every name, everything that's done within the Indian tradition is very much has a deeper meaning. As I said, like the name Rama or Mara, these are syllables, these are sound vibrations that activate that energy of bringing the light. And what is the light? The light of knowledge. The light of knowledge is staying suffering, because the suffering is the darkness. And when we go into the darkness, we go into the shadow, we go into the doubt or the fear. And the light of knowledge, it releases us from that, And all these there's so much I've been introduced to through my research into all this area and the Vedic astrology, particularly how these energies are within us, and we're all making this journey, and it's a journey towards the heart. It's the journey towards what's in your heart. What is your passion? What is your purpose? It's in your heart, and it's in your heart, it. And it's one of these things in Ireland. We didn't pay the penny to the Pope. And why we didn't pay the penny to the Pope is because we had Isa Christ within our heart. Kri is the heart, the Christ is in our heart, and the Isa is what's in the moment. That Isa that became the name Jesus Christ is actually that Isa in our heart, and the light within us is the light that lights up when we're doing things. We're in the moment, in what's in our heart, what we are born to do. That is our purpose. And to get in touch with that purpose, and to take a look at your fifth house in your chart, to get an understanding of your purpose. What planet is there? What planet rules it? Will give you a sense of the personality that comes through you when you get activated in that area. To understand what's in your heart will help you to be true to what's in your heart. And whether you recite the My Sweet Lord or Isa Christ, or remember that we are stardust, and that's the truth. And we need to remember that we are going through a time of change, but when we look back over the period of time, we can see how the change came and what it brought, and we can see how, in a way, we've advanced in some ways, but the greed has never stopped. That has never stopped. But the beauty has never stopped, because everything comes to a head in terms of the chase of the beauty or the money or the greed. As I talked before about the Rajas, the Tamas, the Sattva, the Rajas energy has us chasing those things, the money, the honey, and the more, give me more, give me more. But that the crack comes, whether we laugh at ourselves, whether we break up, whether we, as I said, whatever way the crack comes, it comes. And it's a reminder to come back to our spiritual selves and made aware of our spiritual selves. And that's really what this particular time period between now and the first week in December, this Ketu will be in its home place, encouraging us to look at the spiritual direction, to look for that spiritual direction, look for what thing is in your heart that you really want to do, that you feel is there, quietly waiting for you, or maybe you're in doing it, and tell other people how you got there. You know, that's the other thing, that we need to encourage people to recognise what's there, rather than keep it to ourselves. You know, what lights you up, that is the heart, and the sun rules that place of Leo where this is going on right now. So yeah, we all have to shine in the area that we're ready to shine in, and be proud of it, respect it, and know your gifts, and let your creativity be expressed in whatever is suitable to you, and try and avoid the judgments coming from those who don't recognise what you're doing, and definitely don't share what you're doing if you don't want to get criticised. You know, do it quietly until you're you know, until you're comfortable with it. Anyway, I've gone on a long time now, so I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for listening to me.